Jake Morrison sat in the same chair he had occupied for 12 years. The metal was cold against his back, and the cushion had long since lost any comfort it once provided. Around him, the massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the voices of dozens of alien species, each more impressive than the last. The Zephyrians towered above everyone else, their crystalline bodies catching the light from the chamber's artificial suns. Their voices rang like bells when they spoke, commanding attention from every corner of the room. The Corvans stood nearly as tall, their scaled hides gleaming with natural armor that had protected them through countless wars, even the smallest. Species present, the Andalites, possessed technology that could reshape matter with a thought. Then there were the humans. Jake looked around at his small delegation. There were only 5 of them in a chamber that held over 300 beings. Lisa Hayes sat to his left, her military uniform crisp but unremarkable compared to the glowing battlesuits of the Corvan generals. Dr. Elena Rodriguez shuffled through papers that looked primitive next to the holographic displays floating around. Other delegates. Captain Ryan Clark stared straight ahead, his weathered face showing nothing. Dr. Carl Thompson took notes in an actual notebook. Using an actual pen, they looked exactly like what everyone thought they were: simple, backward. Harmless, the Zephyrian Chancellor called the session to order, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. Today we discuss the expansion of mining rights in Sector 7. The Hegemony has requested access to mineral deposits that fall within current safety zones. Jake had been preparing for this moment for months. Sector 7 contained 3 human colonies and the trade routes that connected them to Earth. The proposed mining operation would cut directly through space that humanity had been using for 30 years. More importantly, it would disrupt the careful network of monitoring stations that humans had built throughout the region. He stood up. The simple movement should have drawn attention, but the chamber's conversations continued around him. He waited, holding a small device that would amplify his voice. Still, no one looked his way. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. Some heads turned. A few conversations paused. Most delegates continued their discussions as if nothing had happened. Chancellor Veltar noticed him finally. "Yes, human representative, you have something to add?" "The proposed mining operation will interfere with established human settlements and trade routes," Jake said. His voice was calm, professional. "We request that the Council consider alternative locations for the Hegemony's operations." A sound rippled through the chamber. It took Jake a moment to realize it was laughter. The Corvan military commander, a massive being covered in scars, spoke first. "Human settlements? You mean those tiny outposts with barely a few thousand residents each?" "The trade routes have been in use for 3 decades, Jake continued. "Our shipping schedules are coordinated with 17 different species. Disrupting them would affect more than just human interests." The Zephyrian Chancellor consulted his floating display. "The records show minimal traffic through those routes. Surely human vessels can find alternative paths." Jake felt Lisa tense beside him. He knew she was thinking about the patrol routes, the careful patterns that human ships followed to keep pirates away from the smaller species cargo vessels. The council members saw simple trade routes. They didn't see the protection network that had kept that entire region safe for years. "The economic impact would be significant," Dr. Rodriguez said, standing to support Jake. "Our analysis shows that rerouting would cost several species their profit margins on key exports." "Your analysis?" The Andalite trade representative's voice carried clear amusement. "Humans perform economic analysis?" More laughter. Jake watched as delegates turned back to their private conversations. The dismissal was complete. They had heard. The human objection considered it briefly and found it worthless. Chancellor Veltar made a gesture, and the chamber's recording system noted the human position. The council acknowledges human concerns. However, the economic benefits of the proposed mining operation far outweigh the minor inconvenience to established routes. The Hegemony's request is approved. Jake remained standing as the chamber moved. On to the next item. The decision had been made without real discussion, without consideration of the consequences. without even basic respect for the species that would be affected. This was not the first time. Jake thought back through 12 years of similar moments. Humans requesting assistance with pirate attacks, only to be told that their small cargo vessels were not worth military protection. Humans offering technological solutions to problems, only to have their ideas dismissed as primitive. Humans volunteering to help with medical crises, only to be told that their limited understanding of alien biology made them useless. The pattern was clear. Humanity was tolerated, not respected. They were seen as a harmless curiosity, a species that had somehow managed to achieve space travel despite their obvious limitations. Jake sat down and activated his personal communication device. The message he sent was simple and brief. It went to every human installation in Council space, every human ship, every human colony. 3 words. Protocol 7. Confirmed. Lisa looked at him with raised eyebrows. Protocol 7 was something they had planned for years but never expected to use. It was the complete withdrawal of humanity from Council space. The session continued. Around them, the Corvan military presented their latest weapons technology, drawing impressed murmurs from the other delegates. The Andalites demonstrated a new form of faster-than-light communication. The Zephyrians announced breakthrough research in energy manipulation. No one asked what the humans had been working on. No one ever asked. Jake listened to the presentations with new ears. The Corvan weapons were impressive, but they required maintenance techniques that only human engineers had mastered. The Andalite communication system worked well, but it depended on relay stations that humans had been quietly maintaining for 15 years. The Zephyrian energy research was groundbreaking, but it built on theoretical work that Dr. Thompson had published in obscure journals that apparently no one read. The session ended 3 hours later. Jake stood with his delegation and walked toward the exit. They passed groups of aliens discussing the day's decisions, making plans, forming alliances. None of them looked at the humans. At the chamber's main exit, Jake stopped. He turned back to face the great hall where the most powerful beings in the galaxy continued their work. Chancellor Veltar was reviewing documents with his staff. The Corvan commander was examining holographic battle plans. The Andalite representatives were already preparing for the next day's trade negotiations. "Excuse me," Jake said, his voice carrying across the chamber one last time. The conversation slowed. Heads turned. This time, they were listening. "I want to inform the Council that humanity is withdrawing from this body, effective immediately. We will be ceasing all operations in Council space and terminating all agreements and treaties." The silence that followed was different from the usual dismissive. Quiet. This was surprised. Chancellor Veltar stood up. "Ambassador Morrison, surely this is a hasty decision. Perhaps we can discuss your concerns in a smaller setting." "There's nothing to discuss," Jake said. "The decision has been made. We will be gone within 60 days. "But your colonies," the Andalite trade representative said. "Your investments, your people." "Will be leaving with us," Jake replied. "All of them," the Corvan commander stepped forward. "Where will you go? Your species controls only a small region of space. You cannot support your entire population in such a limited area." Jake smiled for the first time that day. "We'll manage." He turned and walked out of the chamber, followed by his delegation. Behind them, the voices of the council rose in confusion and debate. But for the first time in 12 years, Jake Morrison was not listening to what they had to say. The humans were going home, all of them. And they were taking their secrets with them. 6 months had passed since the humans walked away from the Galactic Council. In the great chamber where decisions were made for trillions of beings, the empty human seats had been removed. The space looked cleaner now, more organized. Chancellor Veltar had mentioned to his staff that the chamber felt more professional without the primitive furniture that the humans had used. The council had moved on. New trade agreements were signed. Military exercises continued. Research projects advanced. The galaxy kept turning, and most beings had already forgotten that humans had ever been part of the council at all. But in the shipping lanes between star systems, Things were different. Crixeno was the most successful cargo transport owner in the Andromedan sector. His ships carried everything from rare minerals to luxury foods across dozens of star systems. For 20 years, his business had grown steadily. His routes were safe, his schedules were reliable, and his profits were excellent. That was before. The pirates came back. Crixeno stood in his office, looking at reports from his ship captains. 3 vessels had been attacked in the past month. 2 had lost their entire cargo. 1 had barely escaped with the crew alive. The attacks were happening in space that had been safe for decades. Where are the patrol ships? He asked his assistant, a young Andalite named Tefri. There are no patrol ships in those sectors, Tefri replied, checking his records. There never have been, Crixeno frowned. That cannot be right. The Corvan military has always maintained security in those areas. Check the records again. Tefri worked at his computer for several minutes. The records show that the Corvan military has never assigned patrol ships to sectors 15 through 23. Those areas fall outside their standard security zones. But my ships have been using those routes for 20 years, Crixeno said. There have never been pirate attacks before. Perhaps the pirates are expanding their operations, Tefri suggested. Crixeno was not satisfied with that answer. He contacted the Corvan military directly. General Fakmer was busy with training exercises, but he agreed to a brief meeting. My ships are being attacked in sectors that have always been safe, Crixeno explained. I need military protection. For my cargo vessels. General Fakmer looked at his tactical displays. Those sectors are not covered by our patrol routes. They never have been. If you want protection, you will need to hire private security or use different routes. But there were never attacks before, Crixeno insisted. Something was keeping the pirates away. But perhaps you were simply lucky, the general replied. Pirates. Move around? They find new targets? This is normal. Crixeno left the meeting confused and frustrated. He began asking other transport owners about their experiences. The answers were troubling. All of them were having problems. Routes that had been safe for decades were now dangerous. Cargo that had moved without incident for years was being lost to pirates and equipment failures. Meanwhile, in the industrial sector of the galaxy, mining operations were facing their own problems. Director Vashah ran the largest mining operation in Zephyrian space. His machines dug precious metals from asteroids and moons throughout the sector. The operation had been running smoothly for 15 years, producing steady profits and meeting all production targets. Then the machines started breaking down. The first failures seemed normal. Mining equipment was expected to break sometimes. But then another machine failed, then another. Within 3 months, half of his operation was shut down for repairs. What is causing these failures? Vashka demanded of his chief engineer. The machines are old, the engineer replied. They need maintenance that we do not know how to perform. What do you mean, we do not know how to perform it? We have been maintaining these machines for 15 years. The engineer looked uncomfortable. We have been following maintenance schedules that were provided to us. But the actual repair work was done by outside contractors. Which contractors? The records show that human engineers performed all complex repairs and upgrades. They came every few months to service the equipment. Vashka felt a cold sensation in his stomach. When did they last come? 7 months ago? They were supposed to return last month, but they never appeared. The same pattern was appearing throughout the galaxy. On the medical research station, orbiting Kova Prime, Dr. Zeftai was facing a crisis that she did not understand. For 10 years, her research team had been studying a plague that affected multiple species. They had made excellent progress, developing treatments that saved millions of lives. The research was considered a great success of interspecies cooperation. Now, the treatments were failing. The medication is not working, her assistant reported. Patients who should be recovering are getting worse. Dr. Zeftai checked the medical records. The formula has not changed. We are using the same procedures that have worked for years. But the patients are not responding the same way. Doctor. Zeftal spent days reviewing her research notes. She discovered something that made her very uncomfortable. The breakthrough moments in her research, the insights that had led to successful treatments, had all come from informal conversations with human doctors who visited the station. She found reports from those conversations buried in her files. The humans had made suggestions that seemed small at the time. They had pointed out details that the Corvin medical team had overlooked. They had shared techniques that were not part of standard medical training. Dr. Zeftal realized that the humans had been guiding her research without her knowing it. They had been solving problems that she had not even recognized as problems. She tried to contact the human medical team. Her messages went unanswered. The pattern was the same everywhere. On communication stations throughout the galaxy, technicians were discovering that their equipment was failing in ways they could not fix. The humans who had performed regular maintenance visits were gone, and nobody else knew how to do the work they had been doing. Transport systems that had run perfectly for decades were breaking down. Computer networks that had operated without problems were crashing. Medical facilities that had saved countless lives were struggling to treat patients. In the council chambers, Secretary Veltar was becoming worried. Reports of problems were arriving from every sector of the galaxy. Equipment failures, security problems, research setbacks, medical crises. Each problem seemed small by itself, but together they painted a picture of a galaxy that was slowly falling apart. He called a meeting with the council leadership. Chancellor Veltar, General Thakemore, and the other senior officials gathered to discuss the situation. "We are seeing increased problems across all sectors," Secretary Veltar reported. "Mining operations are failing. Transport routes are unsafe. Medical facilities are struggling. Research projects are stalled. These are normal problems," Chancellor Veltar replied. "Equipment breaks down. Pirates attack ships. Medical research has setbacks. This is not unusual. But the problems are happening everywhere at the same time," Secretary Veltar insisted. "And they all started about 6 months ago." General Thakemore looked at the timeline. 6 months ago was when the humans left the council. "That is a coincidence," the Chancellor said. "The humans were not involved in any of these operations. They were a minor species with limited capabilities." But Secretary Veltar was not convinced. He began investigating the human involvement in various operations throughout the galaxy. What he found disturbed him greatly. The humans had been everywhere. Not as leaders or supervisors, but as quiet workers in the background. They had been maintaining equipment, providing security, offering medical assistance, and solving technical problems. They had been doing this work so quietly that most people had not noticed their presence. Now they were gone, and their absence was being felt in every corner of the galaxy. Secretary Veltar prepared a report for the council. But as he worked, he realized that the problems were getting worse every day. The galaxy was starting to fall apart, and nobody knew how to stop it. The humans had walked away quietly. But their silence was becoming the loudest sound in the galaxy. 2 years after the humans left the council, the galaxy faced its first real test. The warning came from a Zephyrian scout ship at the edge of known space. A massive fleet was approaching from the outer rim, moving toward the heart of council territory. The Hegemony had returned. General Thakemore studied the scout reports in his command center. The Hegemony fleet was larger than anything the council had seen in 50 years. Hundreds of warships, supported by carrier vessels and mobile bases. They were moving in a coordinated pattern that suggested careful planning and superior organization. "How many ships do we have available?" he asked his staff. 437 combat vessels spread across 12 sectors, his aide reported. "We can have half of them assembled at the border within 1 week." General Thakemore nodded. The numbers were good. The council had always maintained military superiority over the Hegemony. Their last war had ended with total council victory. This time should be no different, but as the council fleet assembled, problems began to appear immediately. The first issue was communication. The fleet's command and control systems had worked perfectly for decades. Ships could coordinate their movements across vast distances, sharing information instantly and responding to orders without delay. Now, The systems were failing regularly. Commander Yethra of the Andalite destroyer Bright Star found her ship unable to communicate with the fleet command. Her communications officer worked frantically at his console, trying to establish contact. "What is the problem?" she demanded. "The communication array is functioning normally," the officer replied. "But the network protocols are not working correctly. Messages are being lost or delayed." "When did this start happening?" "About 6 months ago, Commander. We have been having intermittent problems since then." Commander Yethra felt a growing sense of unease. 6 months ago was when the humans had left Council space? She remembered human technicians working on communication systems throughout the fleet. They had called it routine maintenance, but perhaps it had been something more important. The communication problems were just the beginning. As the fleet moved toward the battle zone, ships began experiencing mechanical failures. Weapon systems that had worked perfectly during training exercises were now unreliable. Navigation computers were producing incorrect calculations. Life support systems were breaking down. Captain Velmor of the Zephyrian battleship Crystal Sword watched his crew struggle with problems that should have been simple to fix. His chief engineer reported that the ship's main weapons were operating at only 60% efficiency. "What is causing the reduction in power?" Captain Velmor asked. "The targeting systems are not properly calibrated," the engineer replied. "The alignment protocols are incorrect." "Then fix them." "We do not know how, Captain." "The calibration procedures in our manuals do not match the actual equipment. Someone has been making modifications to our systems without updating our documentation." Captain Velmor reviewed the maintenance records. For years, human technicians had been visiting his ship regularly. They had performed routine maintenance, made minor repairs, and updated software. The work had seemed unimportant at the time. Now he realized that the humans had been keeping his ship operational in ways that his own crew did not understand. The pattern was repeated throughout the fleet. Ships that had been perfectly maintained were suddenly experiencing failures that their crews could not fix. Equipment that had operated flawlessly for years was now unreliable. Systems that had seemed simple were actually complex, and the knowledge needed to maintain them had left with the humans. When the Council fleet finally met the Hegemony forces in battle, the results were catastrophic. The battle took place in the neutral zone, a region of space that had been empty for decades. The Council fleet arrived first, taking defensive positions around a group of asteroids. General Thakmar was confident in his strategy. The Council ships had superior firepower and better technology. The battle should be won quickly, but nothing went according to plan. The Council fleet's first attack was poorly coordinated. Ships that should have moved together became separated. Weapons that should have fired simultaneously were out of sync. The careful battle formation that General Thakmar had planned fell apart within minutes. The Hegemony fleet responded with precision and discipline. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, striking at the weakest points in the Council formation. Their weapons were less advanced than the Council's, but they worked reliably. Within hours, the Council fleet was in retreat. Dozens of ships had been destroyed or damaged. The survivors limped back to Council space, carrying news of total defeat. General Thakmar was stunned by the outcome. He had fought the Hegemony before and won decisive victories. His ships were better armed and better protected. His crews were experienced and well-trained. There was no reason for such a complete failure, but as he reviewed the battle reports, a disturbing pattern emerged. Every system failure, every coordination problem, every tactical mistake could be traced back to the absence of human support. The humans had been providing more than just maintenance and repairs. They had been the invisible foundation that made the entire Council military function properly. Without them, the fleet was just a collection of ships that could not work together effectively. Meanwhile, on the medical front, the crisis was becoming desperate. Dr. Zeftel's research station had become a refugee center as wounded survivors from the battle arrived. The casualties were overwhelming, but the medical problems went beyond simple numbers. Diseases that had been controlled for decades were spreading through the survivor populations. Medical equipment that should have been able to treat the wounded was failing. Treatment protocols that had saved lives for years were no longer working. Dr. Zeftel worked frantically to save lives, but she was fighting a losing battle. The medical knowledge that had made her famous was based on human insights that she had not understood at the time. Without human guidance, she was making mistakes that cost lives. "We need to contact the human medical teams," she told her staff. "They will know how to treat these conditions." "We have been trying to reach them for months," her assistant replied. "They do not respond to our messages." Dr. Zeftel realized that the humans were not just ignoring their calls. They were completely gone from Council space. Every human colony, every human research station, every human medical facility had been abandoned. The humans had vanished. So completely that it was as if they had never existed, but their absence was felt everywhere. In the council chambers, panic was beginning to set in. The defeat by the Hegemony was bad enough, but the systematic failure of galactic civilization was worse. Reports were arriving from every sector describing the same problems: equipment failures, system breakdowns, knowledge gaps, and organizational collapse. Secretary Veltar had been investigating the human involvement in galactic affairs for months. His research had revealed a shocking truth. The humans had been quietly supporting every aspect of Council civilization. They had been the maintenance workers, the technical advisors, the problem solvers, and the backup systems that kept everything running. "We need to find the humans," he told Chancellor Veltar. "They are the only ones who can fix these problems." "The humans were a minor species," the Chancellor replied. "They cannot be that important." "They are that important," Secretary Veltar insisted. "Our entire civilization has been dependent on their support. Without them, we are failing." Chancellor Veltar looked at the reports spread across his desk. The evidence was overwhelming. The galaxy was falling apart, and it had started exactly when the humans left. "Send ships to find them," he ordered. "Bring them back, offer them whatever they want." But Secretary Veltar had already tried that approach. The scout ships sent to human space had found nothing. Empty colonies, abandoned research stations, and silent communication arrays. The humans had not just left Council space. They had disappeared completely. The Council was beginning to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. They had dismissed the humans as unimportant, but the humans had been the most important species in the galaxy. They had been holding everything together, and now they were gone. The galaxy was breaking apart, and nobody knew how to stop it. The Hegemony fleet advanced deeper into Council space. Every attempt to stop them had failed. The Council's military forces were falling apart faster than they could be repaired. Planets that had been safe for centuries were now under attack. General Thakmer stood in his command center, watching the tactical display with growing horror. Red markers showed Hegemony forces spreading across the galaxy like a plague. Blue markers showed Council forces retreating or being destroyed. In 3 months, the Hegemony had captured more territory than they had ever controlled in their entire history. "How many ships do we have left?" he asked his aide. 143 combat vessels still operational," came the reply. "But half of those are reporting serious mechanical problems." General Thakmer looked at the numbers in disbelief. 6 months ago, he had commanded over 400 ships. Now his fleet was smaller than a single battle group. The losses were not just from combat. Ships were breaking down faster than they could be repaired. What about the shipyards? Are they producing replacement vessels? The shipyards are having their own problems, General. Production has dropped by 70%. They cannot get their manufacturing equipment to work properly. General Thakmer knew why the shipyards were failing. The same reason everything else was failing. The humans were gone, and nobody else knew how to keep the complex systems running. He had ordered a desperate search for the missing humans. Scout ships had been sent to every system that had once contained human settlements. The results were always the same. Empty colonies, abandoned research stations, and no sign of where the humans had gone. Captain Ryan Clark watched the Council scout ship approach the abandoned human colony of New Denver. The ship moved carefully, scanning for any signs of life. The Council crew was being very cautious, probably expecting some kind of trap. Captain Clark smiled grimly. There was no trap. The humans had simply left, taking everything important with them. The buildings remained, but they were empty shells. The infrastructure was intact, but it was useless without the people who knew how to operate it. The scout ship landed near the colony's main administration building. Captain Clark observed from his hiding place as the Council team explored the abandoned settlement. They were looking for clues about where the humans had gone. They would not find any. The human withdrawal had been planned for years. Every important piece of equipment had been removed. Every computer had been wiped clean. Every document had been destroyed. The humans had left nothing behind that could help the Council understand their technology or find their new location. Captain Clark activated his communication device. This is Phoenix Base. The Council scouts are following the expected pattern. They are finding nothing useful. Understood, came the reply from Admiral Lisa Hayes. Continue monitoring. Do not engage unless they pose a direct threat. Captain Clark settled back to watch. The Council team would search for several more hours, then return to their ship with nothing to show for their efforts. This scene was being repeated throughout human space as the Council grew more desperate in their search, but the humans were not hiding in their old colonies. They had moved far beyond the reach of Council scouts, to regions of space that the galaxy's major powers had never explored. Admiral Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the human flagship Roosevelt, looking out at a sight that would have shocked the Council members who had dismissed humanity as a minor species. Spread across the vast darkness of space was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. The human fleet was not just bigger than anything the Council had ever seen. It was more advanced, better organized, and more powerful than the Council's military forces at their peak. Ships that looked like simple cargo vessels were actually mobile factories and research laboratories. Vessels that appeared to be small patrol craft were equipped with weapons that could destroy battleships. How many ships do we have operational? Admiral Hayes asked her staff. 2,417 combat vessels, her aide reported. Plus support ships, the number reaches over 4,000, Admiral Hayes nodded. The human fleet had been built in secret over decades. While the Council members were focused on their grand political games, humans had been quietly preparing for the day when they would need to stand alone, but the fleet was only part of humanity's preparations. The humans had also been building alliances. Commander Helen Baker stood in a conference room aboard the human diplomatic vessel Freedom. Around the table sat representatives from dozens of species that the Council had never heard of. These were the minor races, the species that had been ignored or dismissed by the galaxy's major powers. The Council's military forces have been defeated, Commander Baker reported. The Hegemony is advancing toward the core worlds. Our intelligence suggests that the Council will fall within 6 months. And what do you propose we do about it? Asked the representative from the Terran Alliance, a group of species that had formed their own government in the Outer Rim. We help them, Commander Baker replied, but on our terms. Why should we help the Council? Asked another delegate. They have ignored us for centuries. They have dismissed our requests for aid and treated us as unimportant. Commander Baker understood their anger. She had felt the same way during her years as a human representative to the Council. Because if the Hegemony wins, they will not stop with the Council. They will come for all of us eventually. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The minor species had been waiting for this moment for generations. They had been preparing for the day when the galaxy's power structure would collapse and they would have their chance to build something better. Meanwhile, back in Council space, the search for humanity was becoming increasingly desperate. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored the Council's communication networks from her hidden research station. The messages she intercepted painted a picture of complete panic. The Council leadership was sending urgent requests for help to every corner of the galaxy. They were offering massive rewards for any information about human whereabouts. They are getting desperate, she told her research team. The latest message from Chancellor Veltar promises to grant humanity full Council membership and voting rights equal to the major species. Too little, too late, replied Dr. Michelle Scott, who had been studying galactic politics for decades. They still do not understand what they have lost. Dr. Rodriguez reviewed the intelligence reports that were arriving from across the galaxy. The pattern was clear. Every system that had been maintained by human expertise was failing. The Council's civilization was not just losing a war, it was collapsing from within. How long do you think they have? Dr. Scott asked. The military will fall first, Dr. Rodriguez replied. Maybe 3 months. The civilian infrastructure will take longer to collapse completely, but the process has already started. I estimate that the Council government will cease to function within a year. The two scientists worked in silence for several minutes, processing the data that showed the systematic failure of galactic civilization. Finally, Dr. Scott spoke again. Do you think we should help them? Dr. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. That decision will be made by people with higher authority than us. But I think the question is not whether we should help them. The question is whether they deserve our help. The search for humanity was expanding beyond the boundaries of known space. Council explorers were venturing into regions that had never been mapped, looking for any sign of human presence. They were finding evidence of human activity, but it was not what they expected. The humans had not retreated to some remote corner of the galaxy to hide. They had been building a new civilization, one that was larger and more advanced than anything the Council had ever achieved. The abandoned research stations and empty colonies were not signs of a species in retreat. They were signs of a species that had outgrown its old limitations. The Council was beginning to understand that they were not searching for refugees who needed their help. They were searching for a power that had grown beyond their comprehension. The humans had not just left Council space. They had evolved beyond it, and time was running out for the Council to find them before their civilization collapsed completely. The Hegemony fleet reached the core worlds on a cold morning in the 3rd year after humanity's departure. The massive invasion force moved through space like a dark cloud, blocking out the light from distant stars. Behind them lay the wreckage of the Council's outer defenses. Ahead lay the heart of galactic civilization. Chancellor Veltar stood in the Council chambers, looking at the tactical displays that showed the approaching enemy. The great hall that had once been filled with the voices of hundreds of delegates was now nearly empty. Most species had withdrawn their representatives, fleeing to the safety of their homeworlds. Only a few dozen beings remained, the stubborn ones who refused to abandon their posts even as their civilization crumbled around them. How long do we have? The Chancellor asked General Fakemore. 3 days, maybe 4, the General replied. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and defeat. The Hegemony will reach the capital system soon. We have fewer than 50 ships left to defend it, and no word from the humans? Nothing. Our search teams have found no trace of them. It is as if they never existed. Chancellor Veltar closed his eyes. 3 years ago, he had dismissed the human departure as unimportant. A minor species leaving the Council was barely worth noting in the official records. Now he understood that humanity's departure had been the beginning of the end, for everything he had spent his life building. The Council chambers shook as the first Hegemony ships entered the outer system. The invasion had begun, but as the enemy fleet advanced toward the capital world, something unexpected appeared at the edge of the system. A single ship, small and unremarkable, emerged from hyperspace. It broadcast a simple message on all frequencies. This is Ambassador Jake Morrison of the Human Federation. I request permission to address the Galactic Council. Chancellor Veltar stared at the communication display in shock. The human ambassador looked older than he remembered. His hair was gray now, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. But his voice was the same calm, professional tone that had been ignored so many times in this very chamber. "Ambassador Morrison," the Chancellor said, his voice shaking with relief and desperation. "Thank you for coming. We need your help." "I am here to discuss terms," Jake replied, "nothing more." Within an hour, Jake Morrison stood once again in the council chambers. But this time the vast hall was almost empty. The few remaining delegates sat in clusters, their faces showing the strain of 3 years of constant crisis. The great displays that had once shown the wealth and power of the galactic government now showed only defeat and destruction. Jake walked to the center of the chamber, the same spot where he had announced humanity's departure. He looked around at the delegates who had once dismissed him without a second thought. 3 years ago, I stood in this place and told you that humanity was leaving," he said. "You barely noticed. You thought we were unimportant." Chancellor Veltar stood up. "We were wrong. We understand that now. Please, we need your help to stop the hegemony." "The hegemony is not your biggest problem," Jake replied. "Your biggest problem is that your civilization is built on a foundation that no longer exists. You have been dependent on human support for so long that you cannot function without it." "Then help us rebuild," the Chancellor pleaded. "Rejoin the Council. We will give you full voting rights, equal status with the major species." "Whatever you want," Jake shook his head. "The Council is finished. It has been dying for 3 years. The hegemony attack is just the final blow." "Then what do you propose?" "Surrender." The word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. The remaining delegates stared at Jake in shock and horror. "Surrender to the hegemony?" Chancellor Veltar asked. "No," Jake replied. "Surrender to us." Before anyone could respond, the chamber's displays activated, showing views of the space around the capital system. The hegemony fleet was still advancing, but they had stopped their attack. They were holding position just outside the inner system, as if waiting for something. "The hegemony has agreed to a temporary ceasefire," Jake explained. "They want to see how this conversation goes." "You have been negotiating with our enemies?" General Fakemore demanded. "We have been negotiating with everyone," Jake replied. "The hegemony, the Outer Rim federations, the independent worlds, the trade unions, everyone except the Council." Admiral Lisa Hayes entered the chamber, followed by a group of human officers, but they were not alone. Behind them came representatives from dozens of species that the Council members had never seen before. Some were clearly from the Outer Rim territories. Others were completely unknown. "Allow me to introduce the Galactic Federation," Jake said. "A new government that has been forming while your council was falling apart." Admiral Hayes stepped forward. "The Federation includes over 300 species and controls more than half the galaxy's inhabited systems. We have been building this alliance for 30 years? 30 years?" Chancellor Veltar said in shock. "But you only left the council 3 years ago." "We left the council 3 years ago," Jake replied. "But we have been preparing for this day much longer than that. Every human in council space was gathering intelligence, building relationships, and laying the groundwork for what would come after your government collapsed." Dr. Elena Rodriguez joined the group, carrying a datapad filled with information. "We have been studying your civilization for decades. We knew it would fail eventually. The council was built on the assumption that the major species were superior to everyone else. But superiority is not the same as competence. We were the ones keeping your civilization running," Admiral Hayes continued. "Your military forces, your communication networks, your medical systems, your industrial production, all of it depended on human expertise that you never bothered to understand." General Kevin Mitchell entered the chamber wearing the uniform of the Federation military. His presence caused a stir among the council delegates, who recognized him as one of the human officers who had been dismissed from council military service years earlier. "The Federation fleet is waiting outside this system," General Mitchell announced. "We have over 2,000 ships ready to engage the hegemony forces. But we will only act if the council officially dissolves itself and transfers all authority to the Federation government." Chancellor Valtar looked around the chamber at the few remaining delegates. The choice was clear. Accept human terms or face destruction by the hegemony. What guarantees do we have? He asked. How do we know the Federation will protect our people? You do not get guarantees, Jake replied. You get a chance to survive. The Federation will govern according to its own principles. Species that cooperate will be protected and included. Species that resist will be left to face the hegemony alone. And if we refuse, Admiral Hayes answered that question, then we leave, the hegemony completes their conquest. Your civilization ends? The Federation continues without you? The silence. In the chamber stretched for long minutes. Finally, Chancellor Valtar stood up slowly. I hereby dissolve the Galactic Council and transfer all governmental authority to the Human Federation, he said. May the galaxy forgive us for what we have. Done. Jake nodded to Admiral Hayes, who activated her communication device. Within minutes, the Federation fleet appeared throughout the system. Thousands of ships emerged from hyperspace surrounding the hegemony forces. The invasion fleet found itself outnumbered 10-1. The battle that followed was brief and decisive. The hegemony forces, caught between the Federation fleet and the system's defenses, surrendered within hours. Their leaders agreed to peace negotiations and the return of all conquered territory, but the real victory was not military. As news of the Council's dissolution spread throughout the galaxy, species that had been ignored and dismissed for centuries began joining the Federation. The new government promised equality and representation for all members, regardless of size or military power. Jake Morrison stood in the former council chambers, now empty except for a few Federation officials preparing the building for its new purpose. The Great Hall would become a museum, a reminder of what could happen when civilizations built themselves on the assumption that some species were more important than others. Admiral Hayes joined him, carrying reports from across the galaxy. The transition is going smoothly, she said. Most systems are accepting Federation authority without resistance. And the former Council species? Learning to work within a system where they are not automatically in charge. It will take time for them to adjust. Jake looked out the chamber's great windows at the space beyond. Federation ships were already working to repair the damage caused by 3 years of systematic failure. Human engineers were training alien crews to maintain their own equipment. Human doctors were sharing medical knowledge that had been closely guarded for decades. The age of human silence was over. Humanity had tried to work quietly within the existing system, supporting and maintaining galactic civilization from the shadows. That approach had failed because the major species had been too proud to acknowledge their dependence on others. Now humanity would lead openly, building a galaxy where strength came from cooperation rather than domination.